The UFC returns to Mexico City this weekend for the first time in over 5 years, and they bring a doubleheader of rematches with them. In the main event, obviously, we got Brandon Moreno taking on Brandon Royval after their first fight ended due to an unfortunate injury suffered by Brandon Royval. And then in the co-main event, another fight stricken by injury in their first matchup. We have Yair Rodriguez taking on Brian Ortega in a featured 5-round co-main event. There's a ton of other great Mexican prospects that are on this card, and the intriguing aspect of this fight card is the fact that there are no fights above the lightweight division. I think the matchmakers knew what they were doing here, considering the elevation that will be at hand and the fact that they don't want to see two guys gassing out in 2.5 minutes trying to throw down with one another. Hope you're laced up and ready to go, because we're off and running with the first fight of the night. It goes down between Eric Silva and Mohamed Naimov, a fight between two guys that like to utilize the grapple heavy advantage, but I don't understand all the heavy love that's coming in on Naimov, pushing him up to a close -600 favorite. Sure, he'll have the pure wrestling advantage in this matchup, but you gotta wonder what the elevation and altitude will do to a guy that utilizes such an aggro style to try to get his wins. Silva is an early finisher type of guy as well, but I think he's going to be outgrinded by Naimov, who should have all the advantages. Next up, we got Victor Altamirano going up against Felipe Dos Santos. Both guys are similar fighters in my opinion, but I think Dos Santos is the guy that utilizes a way more aggressive approach, which will ultimately get his hand raised in this matchup. Look for him to either utilize a grapple heavy approach or a volume heavy approach with his kicks and punches from distance, and I think that will be enough for him to go out there, grind out this win, and win it on the scorecards. Next up, we got the UFC debut of Luis Rodriguez as he goes up against Dennis Bondar. Bondar is obviously looking to buck the losing trend that he's currently on, but I think that he is the better fighter of the two here. You have to worry about the health and durability that he brings into this fight, considering how we got finished by Carlos Hernandez in his last matchup, but I think that he is going to be the best wrestler that Luis Rodriguez has gone up against, and as long as Rodriguez is unable to get that early finish here, I think we'll see Bondar put him through the ringer and grind him en route to a decision victory. Next up, we got Claudio Puelles going up against Faris Ziam, obvious grappler versus striker here. Puelles is the knee bar specialist, as he actually holds the knee bar submission victory record in the UFC, but on the feet, a little bit of a sitting duck. He will obviously be attacking Ziam with a ton of takedowns and crafty ways to get this fight into the jiu-jitsu realm, but I think that we've seen enough improvements from Ziam throughout his career that he should be able to keep this fight upright and utilize his kickboxing advantage to outbox, outkick, and eventually win this fight on the scorecards over Puelles. Next up, we got Edgar Chairez going up against Daniel Lacerda, another rematch on this night of rematches. Last time around, obviously, Chairez locked up I believe it was a dart stroke over Daniel Lacerda, and unfortunately, the referee stepped in when he thought Lacerda went out. Lacerda clearly was not out, and the UFC has decided to put these two together once again. I think Lacerda is one of those guys that looks to go out there and utilize his aggressive style early to try to finish his opponents, but it has caused him to lose 4 straight fights in the UFC. The UFC obviously giving him a 5th shot here, considering the fact that he usually brings it when he goes out there to fight. He's a guy that goes out in his shield pretty much every time he's been in the UFC, but if he's unable to get the early finish, he normally starts to slow down in terms of his cardio and gets finished. I fully expect Chairez to take advantage of that, and I think he's durable enough and resilient enough to deal with the early onslaught that Lacerda normally implements, and I think that will open up a finishing opportunity for Chairez in the 2nd or 3rd round. Next up, we got Jesus Aguilar going up against Matias Mendonca. I'm leaning the Aguilar side here, as I believe his power punching style could keep Mendonca on his back foot, and I think Aguilar is durable enough to deal with the technical striking advantage that Mendonca has, but I think that Aguilar will look to push the pace here to slow down Mendonca, who in my opinion has a bit of a cardio issue, and that will allow Aguilar to either grind this out with his wrestling or eventually find that finish in the 2nd or 3rd round. Next up, we got Christian Quinonez going up against Raoni Barcelos. Barcelos on a very rough 1-4 run over his last 5 fights, while Quinonez is looking to bounce back after a club and sub loss that he suffered at the hands of Kyung Kong. But stylistically speaking, I think Quinonez has the type of style that will give Barcelos issues. The volume style and footwork heavy style of Quinonez from distance will allow him to use his speed advantage and output to try to touch up Barcelos while staying away from the pocket exchanges that makes Barcelos so dangerous. Barcelos is obviously a guy that can rely on his wrestling background if he needs to, but I think that Quinonez has shown good enough takedown defense and get-ups that he should be able to keep this in his realm by touching up Barcelos, and hopefully he's learned from the Kong fight where he can't get too overzealous with the striking, otherwise he'll get caught in return. So if he stays patient, keeps discipline, and is able to just continue to put his output there, he should be able to touch up Barcelos en route to a decision victory. Next up, we got Manuel Torres going up against Chris Duncan. Torres is a guy that's been going out there and steamrolling most of his opponents thus far, as he's finished both of his UFC competitors in the first round of their fights. This is a guy that goes out there and overswings a little bit too much for my liking, which ultimately gives his opponents an advantage to clip him and counter him if he overextends on his shots. If you watch Torres' striking, he does kind of fall over his shots more often than not, but luckily for him, his power has bailed him out of a lot of these opportunities, which is why he's been able to get the finishes that he has. But Chris Duncan is a little bit more of an educated striker and a guy that goes out there and has very much rounded out his MMA game. I think if he can stay safe enough early in this fight, he should be able to find those grinding opportunities up against the cage on the mat and the potential finishing opportunity in the second and third round as Torres starts to slow down. Give me Duncan, and Duncan to pull off the upset. Next up, we got Yasmin Jauregui going up against Sam Hughes. Jauregui suffered her first professional loss last time around when she got knocked out in 20 seconds by Denise Gomez. Now she's going up against a tough and scrappy Sam Hughes, who I believe should have the advantage in terms of taking this fight into deep waters and putting together a good enough body of work to get her hand raised on the scorecards. I think Hughes will be the best wrestler that Jauregui has faced, and even though Jauregui showcases a 100% takedown defense rate, she's only faced 2 takedown attempts in her 3 UFC fights thus far. I think Sam Hughes has been improving enough at the Fortis MMA team, and I believe with the perfect game planning and head coaching that she has, she should be able to go out there and spring the massive upset here over the prospect Jauregui. Next up, we got Raul Rosas Jr. going up against Ricky Turcios. Rosas Jr. bounced back successfully last time around as he was able to dispatch of Terrence Mitchell in 54 seconds, and I think that he should be able to have similar success against Turcios here, but maybe not so much to the point that he gets a finish. Turcios is obviously the more experienced of the two and probably the better striker, but I think that Rosas Jr. will be too persistent in the grappling realm that Turcios will have a rough time trying to get his own offense going. The line is a little bit too wide, but the over 2.5 is not a bad way to attack this fight, as I think that we'll see plenty of grappling situations between the two, but not a finish transpiring. So I think the over 2.5 is the best way to attack this fight, but I still think the youngster Raul Rosas Jr. will get his hand raised on the scorecards. Next up, we got Daniel Zellhuber taking on youngster Francisco Prado. Zellhuber is a very much improving Mexican prospect who's gone out there and utilizes range striking style to try to touch up his opponents, or even utilizing his slick jiu-jitsu game as he showcased against Christos Giagos last time around when Giagos tried to shoot in for a desperation takedown after slowing down, and that ultimately opened up the submission opportunity for Zellhuber. Zellhuber is getting better and better in terms of maintaining his range and distance with his straight shots down the pipe as well as his kicks up the middle. And I think he's going to be able to teach this 21-year-old a lesson, as Prado is a guy that likes to go out there and utilize his power punching approach to try to knock his opponents out. It worked out for him last time around against Atman Azaitar, but that was a fight that it was pretty much a coin flip, considering both guys operate well inside the pocket. But Prado is going to struggle to get inside the pocket against Zellhuber, as Zellhuber traverses the cage well, utilizes his footwork and his straight shots down the pipe to keep Prado from landing, keep Prado throwing at air, and that will slow down Prado. And even if Prado looks to take this fight to the ground, I don't think his wrestling is good enough to get Zellhuber there. I think we see Zellhuber touch up Prado, maybe get a late finish, but I ultimately think Zellhuber wins on the scorecards. That takes us to our first 5-round fight of the night in the co-main event between Yair Rodriguez and Brian Ortega. In the first meeting between the two, Rodriguez was able to keep Brian Ortega at bay, utilizing his striking advantage and touching him up from distance. Ortega was doing some decent damage with the jab that he was landing, but it was clear that Rodriguez was being more successful with the punches that he was landing with. Ortega was able to secure a clinch takedown in the dying seconds of the first round, but Rodriguez threw up a quick submission which ultimately injured the shoulder of Ortega, causing a halt to the fight. Rodriguez really needs to keep this fight in the striking realm, Otherwise, Ortega can utilize the one advantage he normally holds in his matchups, and that's with his submission game. But it's clear Rodriguez has been working on his jiu-jitsu as well, and I feel like even if this fight doesn't end up on the ground, we'll see him use defensive tactics well enough to eventually get this fight back to the feet, where he'll be able to touch up Ortega and finish him by the third round. Now moving over to the main event in the flyweight division, rematch between Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval. The first time these two met back in November of 2020, Moreno utilized a grapple-heavy approach to try to contain the chaotic Royval on the mat. Royval was able to work back to his feet a few times, but Moreno continuously got this fight to the ground, where it seemed like he had good enough submission defense to deal with the aggressive and erratic submission style of Royval, and I think that's going to come to fruition once again as Moreno grinds this fight out, utilizing his wrestling advantage to get this victory on the scorecards. Even if this fight ends up playing out in the striking realm, I think Moreno is the more technical striker of the two and can make Royval pay for the chaotic nature in which he strikes. But I think Moreno will be safest if he takes this fight to the ground and utilizes his top pressure. There you guys go. Quick picks of the UFC Mexico card that we got going down this weekend. Stay tuned, as later today we'll be dropping the Lucky two-step free parlay, which is 5-0 on the year so far. Let's see if we can keep that train rolling. And then tomorrow we'll be dropping the 3 best prop bets for UFC Mexico. Lastly, don't forget there's PFL versus Bellator this weekend as well, and I dropped the breakdown for that yesterday, so check the YouTube channel if you want breakdowns for those and any action, as that is an appetizer for the UFC Mexico card, which takes place later that day. Appreciate all the love and support. Make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.